time to explore the unnerving world of the paranormal. And this time, I want to tell you a story which at first might seem a little fantastic, but I can assure you that it is absolutely true. It really happened, and not too far from where I'm sitting right now. Once again, I'm not going to reveal the identities of the people involved or the exact area they come from, as I have promised to preserve their privacy. Anyway, this event occurred in 1988, on December the 4th to be precise. The people concerned in this cautionary tale, two young men of 23 and 24, had decided to hold a pre-Christmas party. They naturally invited several friends, about 30 in all, and the party was held in the younger man's house. The drink flowed, and by 11:45, a large number of the guests were somewhat soused. Someone, nobody can now remember exactly who, suggested that it might be a big giggle to try to raise the spirit of Christmas by means of a magic circle. This all came about because one of the guests had found a book on magic on one of the shelves in the house. However, not many people thought that this was such a good idea, so it was forgotten. But later that night, or next morning at 2 a.m. to be precise, the remaining guests, by now 6 of them, all of whom were in a drunken state, decided that the magic circle wasn't such a bad idea after all. I should explain here that the guest in question had noticed that the book he had got hold of explained all about magic, and in fact detailed some rituals. I actually have a copy of this book, and I can assure you that I wouldn't try anything contained in it. Anyway, they all sat down in a circle, and one of the young men started to read out one of the rituals. They tried to prepare themselves as detailed in the book, but when they found out they didn't have any of the ritual paraphernalia, they decided not to bother with it and just carry on with the ritual. This was a very silly and dangerous thing to do. They all settled down, and after some giggling, they began to feel slightly nervous. The room became noticeably colder, especially around the area the young people were sitting. But drink brings with it its own courage, and even though they were beginning to doubt the wisdom of their actions, nevertheless, the young people carried on with chanting the ritual words. Nothing much seemed to happen, except for the coldness, of course. And just as one of the young men was about to suggest that they gave it up as a bad job and get another drink, something occurred which was to change their lives forever. A sort of whitish mist seemed to spring up from the floor and hover just above the surface. It had no definite shape, although it looked as if it could be a small animal. Suddenly, the room was plunged into absolute darkness, except for the mist, that is, because it seemed to glow with an eerie white light. The young people were terror-struck, but as is often the case in situations like this, they felt powerless to move or speak. The mist began to sort of sway round the circle of frightened people, touching each one in turn. And as it touched them, they felt as if someone was pouring freezing water on them. They all began to shiver uncontrollably. Then the mist stopped swaying and hovered motionless in front of the young man who had been reading the ritual words. Without warning, it seemed to lunge for the young man and then just disappear into him like water into a sponge. At that, the room immediately warmed up and the oppressive feeling lifted from everybody. Everybody, that is, except the young man who had absorbed the mist. He just sat there, staring ahead of him, unable to move or speak. All thoughts of continuing were forgotten, and very soon the party broke up. The young man wasn't seen for the next 2 days, but when he eventually presented himself at his local pub, the change in him was immediately apparent. From being a fun-loving young man, he had become morose and bad-tempered and extremely depressed. When his friends asked him if he was all right, he admitted that he'd begun to have nightmares and hadn't slept for the past 2 days. He said that he thought perhaps he was sickening for something, probably a cold, and that he'd soon be all right. But he didn't improve. His work began to suffer. And then, about 3 weeks after the party, he began to hear strange noises and bumps in his house. He put it down to tiredness, but deep down he knew it was more than that. Even so, he wouldn't admit that he might have conjured up something at the party. He maintained that all magic was a myth, a fairy tale. But whatever was affecting him seemed to follow him to his parents' house when he visited them at Christmas. And they were shocked by the change in their son. He looked quite ghastly. When asked what was wrong, he just said that he was under a lot of pressure at work and he was a little tired. But the second night that he was at their house, his sister had a nasty experience. She woke up in the middle of the night to find herself being physically pulled from her bed. She was petrified and paralyzed with fear. She couldn't understand what was happening to her. From somewhere, she found the strength to scream, which brought both her parents and her brother to her room. The parents said afterwards that they noticed a terrible smell in the room, and it was freezing cold. And then, even after their son had returned to his own house, they began to experience bad luck. The father fell down the stairs and broke his leg so badly that he was off work for nearly 6 months. Shortly afterwards, the mother burned herself quite severely when the gas stove suddenly flared up without warning or explanation. And the young man, the instigator of all this, was on his motorbike when, as he said, he was suddenly pulled off it by an unseen hand. It seemed now that all the family were possessed. Now, the mother was a religious woman, and she was the first to suggest that something was wrong. And her son finally admitted what had occurred at the party. Up to this point, he had said nothing. Mother's first reaction was to call in the local priest, which she did. But even though he obtained permission to conduct an exorcism from his superiors after he heard the tale of what had been done, he wasn't successful in laying what had been raised. He was convinced that something unnatural had been unwittingly invoked. Early in 1989, I got to hear of the story, and I had a word with a person who is an adept at ritual magic. This person said that the only thing to do was to invoke the entity again and then to banish it. A dangerous thing to do, but there was no alternative. I didn't attend the ritual, so now I can only quote from second-hand. After much preparation, a ritual was performed, and the entity was invoked again, and it was quite a strong negative force. Ultimately, after a lot of effort, it was returned from whence it came. But the mental scars have remained, and the whole family has not been the same since. There's a postscript to this story. In January of this year, the young man who was the instigator of all the trouble committed suicide. His friends to whom I have spoken said that he was never the same after the party. He suffered deep depression and awful nightmares, even after the entity was banished, and he'd spoken of a feeling as if he was still possessed. And more than once, he had said that death was the only way he could be free of what he had created. The moral to this story is please, please, don't mess with anything you don't understand. Magic is not a game. It is very real and potentially fatal in the hands of amateurs.